5 years ago, one of the world's most expensive necklace, Eye of the Forest, was stolen from a museum in Paris. However, the thief was immediately caught and imprisoned, but the necklace is nowhere to be found. 5 years later, the thief named Dan is released from prison, but Detective Pierre, the officer who apprehended him, waits outside the prison to warn Dan that he is still not truly free. But Dan ignores the warning. Pierre then orders one of his colleagues to follow him. Pierre's men tail Dan into a convenience store but lose him when Dan escapes by boarding a helicopter. Soon the helicopter arrives in Cannes, France, and Dan parachutes down and immediately rides a bike prepared for him. He receives instructions from his protégé Poe, who is disguised as a member of the hotel staff, to securely pass all the hotel's security checks. Poe's task is to remove Dan's records from the hotel's system, because the hotel is hosting an auction that will feature the second most expensive necklace, Wings of Destiny, and they are planning to steal it. As the auction begins, the Wings of Destiny necklace is presented. Dan remotely puts a tracker to it using his phone, and Poe starts monitoring it. However, there is a problem. Pierre arrives, suspecting that Dan will attempt to steal another precious item, and begins searching for him inside the hotel. Without delay, they proceed with their plan. With the help of another team member named Red, who is disguised as one of the protesters outside, Red initiates a commotion that causes the protesters to storm the auction. In response, the security team moves quickly to secure all the treasures by returning them to the vault, including the Wings of Destiny. Poe tracks the necklace's location and uses high-tech equipment to break into the back of the vault. However, Pierre convinces the guards that someone is planning to steal from the vault. Fortunately, just before the guards can open the vault, Poe escapes, and Red drives him out of the hotel to safety. At the same time, Dan approaches one of the guests with the intention of stealing another necklace from her. With the help of another apprentice and a smoke bomb, he successfully takes the necklace. Meanwhile, as they exit by the parking, Pierre notices Poe and Red on their car and begins chasing them. He manages to tail them throughout the city, but when they reach a tunnel, Poe and Red decide to take down Pierre's car, causing it to crash, but Pierre miraculously survives. Later, they meet Dan and receive their payment for the job, but Dan informs them that this was his last job, as he plans to retire. Meanwhile, Pierre meets with Dan's ex-fiancée, Amber, and begins questioning her about Dan's whereabouts. However, Amber angrily insists that she hasn't seen or spoken to Dan since he was imprisoned. Pierre, convinced that Dan is planning to steal the final piece of the necklace treasure, known as the Rope of Life, asks Amber for her help in locating Dan, but she declines. But before she leaves, Pierre hands her his calling card in case she changes her mind. At the same time, Dan and Poe arrive in Prague to meet with King Kong, the buyer of the Wings of Destiny, who also has the Eye of the Forest. Dan considers King Kong his mentor and a father figure to him, but King Kong pays him less than expected, making Dan's retirement impossible. King Kong explains that since the necklace is composed of 3 parts, Dan must steal the final piece, the Rope of Life, to complete the set known as Gaia, which they can sell for a higher price. After King Kong convinces him that this job is worthy of retirement, Dan agrees to take it on. After they leave, Dan notices they are being followed and decides to split up. He boards a tram where the pursuer follows, and it is revealed to be Amber. However, Dan avoids a confrontation with her and leaves her behind. Later, Amber meets with Pierre, revealing that she has agreed to help him track Dan, revealing that she met Dan to hack into his cell phone. There, they discover that Dan is indeed after the Rope of Life and is currently on a mission to steal it from a billionaire businessman and collector named Law. Meanwhile, the trio arrives at Law's mansion to spy on it, and Red devises a plan to attract Law's attention. Her plan works when Law approaches her during one of his gatherings where Red pretends to be a wine critic. And Law, both intrigued and attracted to her, agrees to grant her request for an interview. The next day, Law calls Red to arrange the interview, and she immediately prepares to meet him. Soon, Red arrives at the mansion wearing special eyeglasses designed to scan and analyze every security detail of the place. As Red and Law talk, he reveals that his birthday is approaching and invites her to his party, which Red eagerly accepts. During the interview, Red cleverly steers the conversation toward the Rope of Life and asks if she can take a picture of it. Law agrees, and they proceed to his high-tech vault, which features an advanced security system and a guard dog. Inside the vault, Red immediately deploys a robot spider they plan to use later. She also discovers that the rope of life is secured with a lock requiring 5 of Law's fingerprints to access. Meanwhile, as Pierre and Amber track the trio, she observes him playing with Chinese medicine balls, which, according to him, lower his stress. Amber asks why Pierre is so determined to capture Dan. Pierre reveals that he didn't actually capture Dan that day because he had crashed his car. Pierre thought he was going to die in the crash, but Dan helped him escape from the burning vehicle just before it exploded. Pierre admits that, despite Dan being a good man, he feels obligated to capture him because he is a policeman and Dan is a thief. He further explains that his father was also a thief and was imprisoned for it. Pierre points out that his father and Dan don't just steal money or treasures, they steal the trust of their loved ones. For that reason, Pierre believes he is giving Dan an opportunity to change his ways. On the other hand, the trio prepares to steal the rope of life, where Red will wear a dress equipped with technology to scan Law's fingerprints. While Red attends the party as an invited guest, Poe will infiltrate the mansion by hiding inside the barrel of wine. Poe will then take down the guards in the surveillance room using tranquilizers to hack into the surveillance cameras, including one installed on Law's phone, while Dan enters the mansion through the roof, as there is no easier way inside the vault. When the party begins, Law immediately notices Red and asks her to dance, which is according to the plan to be able to scan Law's fingerprint. However, their attempts fail multiple times, forcing Red to do everything she can to keep Law's hand on hers until they finally manage to get a clear scan. Soon, they deploy the robot spider Red had left that will unlock the vault from the inside. However, the dog catches the spider and begins destroying it. Fortunately, Poe manages to release an electric shock, forcing the dog to let go of the spider. After the dog lets go of the spider, they begin using a laser to cut through the vault's lock and successfully opens it. However, Pierre arrives at the party to talk to Law about his findings regarding the trio. At first, Law is not convinced by Pierre's claim, but when he finds his guard dog outside the vault, he believes him, and his guard immediately captures Red. After realizing Red is in trouble, Dan and Poe rush to take the rope of life from its vault and successfully steals it. However, Law and his men are on their way to the vault, so Dan instructs Poe to leave, but instead, Poe rescues Red from the 2 men guarding her. The trio manages to escape the mansion with all of Law's men chasing after them. They soon spot them escaping through the woods, and when Poe and Red rides their ATV, Law's men pursue them on bikes. But when they reach a nearby river, Poe reveals that his ATV can also convert into an amphibious vehicle, allowing them to successfully escape from them. Meanwhile, Dan, riding a bike, is pursued by Pierre and Amber. When they reach a nearby quarry, Pierre is forced to shoot Dan, injuring him in the shoulder and causing him to crash his bike. Pierre gets out of his car and gives Dan a final warning, saying he will shoot him dead if he tries to escape. Witnessing this, Amber changes her mind, drives the car to knock Pierre out of the way, and helps Dan escape. As they escape, Dan asks why Amber changed her mind, and she tells him that she wants to give him another chance. Dan then reveals that when he stole the Eye of the Forest, someone betrayed him, causing him to get caught and also steal the necklace, and he went back to being a thief to lure the traitor out. Soon, they all meet at their rendezvous point to parachute down for their final escape plan. However, they realize they lack one parachute for Amber. Dan decides that Amber should take his parachute, and he will find another way out on his own. But then, King Kong arrives with his men intending to take the necklace from them without paying for it. As Dan prepares to fight, Red steals his gun, revealing that King Kong had hired her first. King Kong takes the necklace and Amber then escapes in a helicopter. However, Poe manages to deploy the spider on the helicopter to track them later. Before the police arrive at the scene, Dan instructs Poe to leave him behind and begins tracking Amber. Meanwhile, Dan is captured and Pierre interrogates him about the whereabouts of the necklaces, which form the most expensive one known as Gaia. Instead, Dan offers to retrieve the necklace from King Kong, explaining that his team is the only one that can track him. Pierre agrees, but on one condition, that Dan will bring back Gaia afterward. Soon, Dan and Poe find King Kong in an old warehouse, holding Amber hostage and preparing to meet the buyer of the necklace. However, Dan is captured by King Kong, and Red captures Poe. When Poe asks Red why she sides with King Kong, she tells him that she owes her life to him. There, King Kong reveals that he has created a proximity bomb with Gaia. The bomb will trigger if Gaia is moved more than 1 kilometer away from it, which doesn't make sense. King Kong instructs Red to watch over them for a while as he takes Gaia to the buyer. After King Kong and his men leave, Dan tries to convince Red that King Kong plans to kill her along with them because he no longer trusts her. Meanwhile, King Kong meets the buyer with equally armed men. As the transaction begins, Dan arrives with Red as his hostage, threatening King Kong that he will shoot her. However, before Dan can make more threats, King Kong shoots Red in the chest, killing her. This reveals that King Kong truly doesn't care for her and is only after the money. King Kong prepares to shoot Dan. However, Red intervenes and shoots the gun out of King Kong's hand, revealing that she is wearing a bulletproof vest and did not die. 5 years ago, one of the world's most expensive necklace, However, King Kong chases them on a machine gun, forcing them to throw the case back to him. King Kong then escapes in his car, rushing out of the area. But it is revealed that Dan had switched Gaia with the bomb inside the case. As King Kong drives away, he hears the ticking sound from inside the case. Though King Kong manages to stop the car, his guard's vehicle crashes into his, pushing it beyond the 1-kilometer limit, triggering the bomb. After a while, the Gaia is returned to the museum as Dan promised, and Pierre receives Chinese medicine balls from Amber, who has now joined Dan's team. See you in our next Film Flash. Thank you for watching.